All right, so tonight's session is about dating in the midst of a hookup culture. So you might be wondering what do I have to do with this topic? So to introduce, I'm Kevin Muico. I'm a husband, married to my wife Tisa. I'm a missionary and TOB speaker. And to cut the long story short, I am a product of the hookup culture, and a lot of the things that I experienced, well, basically they entered into my marriage, and to an extent, not to an extent, it affected it in a very significant way. My wife's name is Tisa. Um, Unfortunately, she couldn't make it today because she works night shift at the hospital. So we pray for all our frontliners. Um, my wife is an artist, and for the most part, you'll see her art in my slides this evening. She comes on the other end of the spectrum. I was her first boyfriend, and so when we came together, dating, eventually getting engaged and getting married. Of course, there's a lot of things to unpack there, and a lot of things to go through because of our own varied experiences. Okay, so first and foremost, I have this one question. All right, so if your camera's on, just raise your hands or not. If your camera's not on, then just do the. If you don't know yet, there's a. I'm not sure if it's on this actual. Is it on the reactions? You can react with an applause, thumbs up. You know what I mean? Like, just react. So at least there's some sense of normalcy. All right. First and foremost, okay, since we're talking about dating, it might be good for people to connect, right? I'm I'm a missionary about families, and so I want the vocation of marriage to flourish. So who here is single and not in a relationship? Raise your hands. Come on, don't be afraid. All right, guys, take note. All right, just take note. You can use this later. You can use what I'll be talking about later. All right. Again. For those who are single and not in a relationship, raise your hands. Again. All right. There's quite a few. All right. Good Catholic vocations here, friends. We're making it grow and cultivating it here. All right. If you're anyone like me, and my wife too, and I think for a lot of us, question: is your idea of marriage based on a Disney movie? You can type it on chat. You can just do a thumbs up. You can raise your hands. Is your idea of marriage based on a movie? Okay, don't lie. Wow. Really? Not affected? Like, legit? I'm the only one? You guys are lying. All right? Or in the words of the youth right now, you guys are capping. All right? Is your idea in any way of marriage affected by Disney? Really? No one? No one? Just me? Interesting. All right. Why do I ask this question first? Well, because my friends, ideas have consequences. Ideas have consequences. This is the first premise that we will be working on. Ideas, if it's a good idea, then there can be a good outcome. If it's a bad idea, then you can have bad outcomes. If you have a great idea, you can have potentially a great outcome. However, if you start with a terrible idea, you're going to come up with a terrible outcome. How do I know this? Well, let's start at the very, very, very beginning. Lucifer thought for himself that he could be greater than God. Was that a bad idea? A good idea? A great idea? Or a terrible idea? I think everyone here, I'm hoping, right? We're on Theology on Tap. That is a terrible idea. The reason why we're here is because Lucifer fell, and then to top it off, Adam and Eve both decided to accept that terrible idea of eating from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's a mouthful, right? It was a terrible idea. if we act on ideas, they have consequences. That's the first thing. And I'd like to say that at the core of this conversation, at the core of our theme for tonight's talk, right? Dating in the midst of a hookup culture, I hope it's clear to everyone that I won't take a lot of time here on, is that the hookup culture is a terrible idea, right? If the culture of hooking up was a good idea, and the fruits of its promises, right, would actually yield what it promised, right? That if you hooked up, then you would have sexual compatibility. It should have led to happier, more fulfilled marriages, but clearly statistics show that it hasn't. In fact, if you look up Stats Canada, I was going to put up numbers here, but then I realized I don't want to bore you with numbers. So just, if you don't believe me, go on Stats Canada right now. They released a set of statistics on divorce and separation starting like late last year and then a few years down the line. People who cohabitate, who hook up, the length of their relationships don't last, and they're prone to entering into more relationships, more unfailed relationships because of it, right? Why is divorce and separation at an all-time high, right? Abortion is through the roof, right? If contraception did what it's supposed to do, well, clearly we're experiencing negative effects. And we could say that Pope Paul VI, the author of Humanae Vitae, is a prophet, and he is. So the hookup culture is a terrible idea. And if we act on certain ideas, they have specific and dire consequences, right? That's the first one. The second thing here that I'd like to share to everyone, Pope Benedict said this. It's not in one of his like great sessions or like an encyclical. I actually just got it from a book. He said this very, very specifically. A human being is a unity, right? A human being is a unity. Why is that my second point? Because for us here who live in North America, for the most part, I mean, there's one person here who's from London, England. But for the most part, we live in North America because like there was one from San Francisco. Our idea of life is very compartmentalized. We have life in church. We have life in our young adult group or youth group. We have life with a family. We have life with work, right? And we tend to live these lives distinct from one another, thinking that our life and our work will not affect our home life, right? Our relationships, our relationship with God. And we tend to assume that all of these things are just there. And if you do well in one aspect, right, you can suck in one aspect and live this thing perfectly and everything's going to be fine. But clearly that's not the case. You and I are a union of body and soul. And that's inseparable. Well, until you die, that is, right? And that's what death is, the separation of body and soul. But the point here is, because we tend to live our lives we compartmentalize our lives, what happens then is we act on this terrible idea that what I do in dating, what I do in my relationships, doesn't affect me, my life, my spiritual life, life with others, my life with my future spouse. Right? And I'll explain more on this. Right? That's the second point I'd like to make. The third point I'd like to make, and this is really at the core of it. At the beginning of the papacy of St. John Paul II, he wrote this on the second paragraph of Redemptor Hominis. He said this: man cannot live without love. Man cannot live without love. He remains a being that is incomprehensible for himself. His life is senseless if love is not revealed to him, if he does not encounter love, if he does not experience love and make it his own, man cannot live without love. You see, the hookup culture, dating, all of this points to this actual truth that we cannot live without love. All of us are made for love, for God is love. We're literally designed for an eternity, a community, to enter into the community of love. That, like, you and I are made for that. Unfortunately, we act on this terrible idea that we will find love through hooking up. And the way we date and then the way we live our lives, when we compartmentalize our lives, it severely hampers that. All right. So, that's a lot of stuff that I've said so far. 3 things, right? I've said that ideas have consequences. A human being is a unity, and that man cannot live without love. 3 things. So what does it have? These 3 things have to do with dating and hooking up, and how do we go about this? I won't tell you how to date. It's interesting when people like asking about dating. Like I really want to give people the principles and instead of like the practical things. Although I'll do share those things. Even if you go on Catholic speakers, right? Jason Everett, Christopher West, Christophanic, like Matt Fradd, like name any Catholic speaker. They have different ideas on how to date. I'm not gonna tell you how. Like I think that you can look them up easily. But for tonight, I'll share 3 things, 3 principles that will help us live not just our dating lives, but live out our vocations and hopefully lead us to our vocation, the big V vocation of whether we're called to marriage, religious life, or the priesthood, or the consecrated life. Or if we're not there yet, at least to be able to live that life now. So the first thing to screen all of this is that the first one is that we're called to happiness. We're called to happiness. If you look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, CCC 1718, the Catechism quotes St. Augustine himself. The Catechism says, and St. Augustine himself, he says this: we all want to be happy. We all want to be happy. Who here wants to be happy? Raise your hands. Right? Who here wants to be sad? Raise your hands. Like, no one wants to be sad. Right? We all want to be happy. Fortunately or unfortunately, hooking up, their idea of grasping at happiness is a freaking terrible idea. Because in the world's terms, to be happy is to satisfy oneself. To satisfy oneself. But when we look at the lives of the saints, it's so interesting that most of the happiest people I personally know are people on their way to sainthood, on their way to sanctity. Look at the lives of the people in your lives that are genuinely happy. Are they closer to God or are they far from God? I can name a lot of names here, right? Like one of my favorite comedians, Robin Williams, he killed himself. The guy I really wanted to be, Anthony Bourdain, who is a great chef and, a restaurateur, was a overall food hero. Just imagine, he was traveling the world to eat, meet people, and he got paid a lot of money by CNN to do it. To me, that's the best job in the world. And still, he committed suicide. He did not find fulfillment there. So does food, money, sex, power, fame bring us authentic happiness? I'd say no. Rather, it points to something deeper. Because our idea of happiness is usually starting from where the devil wants it to start. It's already been twisted. Our understanding of happiness has been redirected. Instead of outward, it's been directed to the self. Right? We find our happiness in the other through the satisfaction of our desires, of our lust, of our greed, right? Of our desire to be wanted. However, in the lives of the saints, happiness can be found in the gift of self, right? St. John Paul II says in his Theology of the Body, man cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of self, right? Name anyone in your life right now who is into the hookup culture. Maybe you yourself, like you don't need to say raise your hands or whatever. But in your own experience, have you truly been happy because of your indulgence in this lifestyle? But contrast that with the life of the saints. Now that's happiness. It's in the giving of themselves and ourselves that we find true happiness. When I was about to get married, I asked in Filipino, there's this term called titos and titas. It basically means aunts and uncles. And in our community, there's a lot of married couples. And so I asked them for, what's your wisdom? What's one thing that you can share to me that will allow me to live a happy life with my wife? And the titos, the uncles, everyone who was married, they kept saying the same line. They said this: happy wife, happy life. Happy wife, happy life. And I was like, what the heck does that mean? Like, that's so vague. Happy wife, happy life, right? Some of them would say happy spouse, happy house. And to me, I'm like, what does that mean, right? It was so vague. It wasn't until I was married that that made a lot of sense. It's when my wife is sad, mad, whatever feeling or emotion she might be feeling, my life is miserable. I'm not even gonna lie. My food sucks. Like if you're getting the cold shoulder, my life is just miserable. But if my wife is happy, then I'm also happier. In this maxim of happy wife, happy life, we come to the truth of the matter that our own happiness cannot be found in the satisfaction of my happiness, but rather in the happiness of the other, the one whom I'm supposed to love. If you want to be happy, then it has to be found in the other. It has to be directed outward, not inward. A lot of the times when we go out and date and, some of you who's joining tonight, there's 67 of you now. That was only 38 when I last looked. Some of you I journeyed with in youth ministry and young adult ministry. And in our community, Youth for Christ and Singles for Christ. And the one thing that I hear a lot is that, how about my happiness? And I want to smack them every single time they say that. Because every time you say that, you want to be happy, then you've lost what it means to be truly happy. We need to redirect that our object of happiness is not ourselves, but what the church rightly teaches, that it can be found in the other, right? This means that for us to be truly happy, it has to be directed to the other. It has to be directed to the other. If you want to be happy in life, start. This is one thing I hear a lot. Anyone here because of this pandemic, my life's been whack, and sometimes you just want to watch stand-up comedy. Anyone here know Sebastian Maniscalco? No. stand-up comedian, Italian. No? No one okay, I'm the only guy. Anyway, comedians have this way of unearthing the truth and saying it for what it is without telling you what it is. To me, they have a way of evangelizing with you being evangelized without it being so direct. Anyway, like he made this joke. I'm not sure if it's going to convey properly, but amongst our generation, we have this tendency to think that, I'm going to take a year off after university because I'm going to find myself. We're going to find ourselves. And when Sebastian said this to his dad, this really old, man's man Italian dad, he said where are you going to find yourself? I see you. You're right here. Right? Stay home. I can't do Italian properly. But you should watch it. It's really funny. He skip. But the truth is there. That's the truth of the matter. We can't find ourselves out there. We can, we're here. It is when we give of ourselves that when we truly find happiness. Sometimes we have this term, and I tell my wife this, it unnerves me. When people say, look, I'm going to do some self-care. But it's very inward looking. Very inward looking. And the activity doesn't really draw you out of yourself. So one thing to look out for. Second point I'd like to make is that it's not just about happiness, right? We need to revisit the idea and how we live out happiness. It's also the concept of being healthy, all right? The concept of being healthy, all right? I don't know about you guys, but for me personally, this pandemic has hit me hard because I've been eating a lot. And the concept of dieting, it was like a yo-yo for me personally. But it's easy to think of healthy in that context, right? The way we diet, the way we eat, the way we work out. Those things are good. Don't get me wrong. Those things are very good. But there's one aspect that I'd like everyone here to visit and revisit. How about our relationships? Not just with people, but also with things. Are they healthy? The concept of a healthy dating life in the hookup culture is one-night stands. But what we fail to see is that it creates bonds that last a lifetime with no regard on how it affects us. How it affects our relationships, how we view men and how we view women, right? We even fail to see how our relationship with our parents also affect our own relationships moving forward. There's always a running joke in comedies and in TV shows where they say that, oh, you're marrying your mother or you're marrying your father. There's a truth to that. Because if we fail to properly redirect and order our relationships, there is a huge opportunity cost there that we might fall into the sins of our parents, and then we deep dive into that without us knowing it. For those who failed to see earlier, I'm gonna let it sink in for a bit. So, for those who know the style, this is in the style of Animal Crossing. Anyone here played Animal Crossing or plays Animal Crossing? No one? Just one person? Two people? All right, maybe I should have chosen better examples. But Animal Crossing is basically this game where you play. You're basically in an island. You build this island. You do a lot of things there. If you know The Sims, it's like The Sims, but more cute and less stressful. Anyway, when it's the highest grossing game throughout this pandemic because it timed perfectly. It's only available to the Nintendo Switch, and the pandemic hit during the time of its release. And has a cult following. And what happened was when it got released, my wife, because she works at the hospital, she was getting a bit anxious and stressed. So I told her, you know what, you need something to divert your attention to. So I got her Animal Crossing. What I did not intend and what ended up happening was that she got into like Animal Crossing, like way into it. She was on Animal Crossing the moment she woke up to the moment she slept. Like that's all she did when she wasn't working. And no, she got so addicted to Animal Crossing that I had to remind her, like, hey, like you have a husband here, right? Now she's ditched that for the better. I, on the other hand, have not. Like, it's not Animal Crossing. That's my cross right now. It's Call of Duty. That's my cross. So for the guys, you want to add me up, Warzone? You know, hit up on Discord. We can play after this. But the point I'm saying here is that we have relationship to things, whether we like it or not. We have relationships with people, whether we like it or not. And if those relationships are unhealthy, they will affect everyone and everything in our lives. Because again, second point, the human being is a unity. There's no such thing as compartmentalization. You're your only person. You're you. And whatever you do and whatever we do, it affects everything. Right? I'm also wearing here, I'm a Celtics fan through and through. Like, I'm named after Kevin Muico. So for those guys who watch NBA, like, you know, Kevin Muico is a Celtic great. But I live here in Toronto, and my wife hates it. Because if every time there's a Celtics game and a Raptors game, I'm wearing, like, you know, I'm like bleeding green. I'm at like the ACC and I'm like shouting like, let's go Celtics. And my wife tells me like, calm down. Like, you know, people are going to stab us here. During the playoffs, during the bubble playoffs, I was at downtown and I was literally, was it game 7, game 6? I was the only guy wearing like a Celtics jersey in Kensington Market. And people were like giving me like the like the dirtiest looks. But I could care less. Why? Because I knew in my heart who I am a fan of first. Right? It's the Celtics and then the Raptors. Don't get me wrong. I love the Raptors too. But Celtics, between the Celtics and the Raps, it's always the Celtics. What does this mean to each and every one of us? There needs to be an order and priority when it comes to our relationships. One of the biggest misunderstood words in the Catholic Church among youth, young adults, ask anyone in church, is the word chastity. You've heard chastity talks left and right, online, face to face, and still have a misunderstanding of it. I'll propose to you one line that St. John Paul II, which I personally think encapsulates what it means to be chaste. He said this at TOB 131. He said, chastity is to live in the order of the heart. Chastity is to live in the order of the heart. To simplify it, what does it mean? There is a proper order and a proper intimacy to things and people. And our response to that intimacy and how we grow into intimacy, and if we do it rightly, that is when it is chaste. I'll say that again. If it's ordered, prioritized, and acted upon rightly, that is what it means to be chaste. To be chaste, therefore, is not the absence of sex. In fact, for us married couples, part of committing the marital act or having sex with my wife is in fact a chaste thing to do. But outside of it, it is a great evil and it's a terrible idea. Follow so far? Even if I love my girlfriend, if I did the marital act outside marriage, it's unchaste. But if I do it in its proper time, proper context, within marriage, with the proper intentions, then it can be chaste. To be chaste, therefore, is to love in the order of the heart. To love in the order of the heart. To be chaste is to love in the order of the heart. What this means is that my love for God should be first and foremost. My wife follows second, very close second. I tell my wife this all the time. I love you, but not as much as God. When I first said this to her, she was like, "What the heck are you talking about?" Like, she was like, it like set off fire, and then she was like, "What are you talking about?" But now she's coming to an understanding that that's true. Our love for people should come before our love for things, right? So, but it's also important to recognize that there is an order in the way we should love and how we should love. If you love, like, I know there's some people here who's really addicted to their phones, right? Like, for the longest time, you've had an iPhone, you stuck to an iPhone, you're Apple, like, fanboy through and through. Or fangirl through and through. I could not care less. Like, I'm just going to flip whatever is better. For that year, I'm going to switch to that. But the point here is that our fandom, right? Our fandom of the Celtics, of the Raptors, should not get in the way of our love for God. So to me, it throws me off when people go to church wearing their jerseys, because I'm like, you're outwardly showing who's your priority, right? Of course, we can't judge people, but it's a point of reflection for each and every one of us. This is one thing that I realized just this morning. St. John Paul II, he said, further in TUB, he said, only the chaste man and the chaste woman are capable of true love. And one of the descriptions of St. Joseph is he is the most chaste spouse. It's interesting that out of every man in history, Joseph, who was explicitly described in the scriptures as a just, righteous, and holy man, right? Those three things. Just, righteous, and holy man was given the privilege and responsibility of taking care of the Blessed Mother and Jesus himself. Think about that. Therefore, when we think of relationships, it should always be healthy. So it's not just happiness, but also a healthy relationship with things and others. Now, I can go deep more, but like I said, I just wanted to share the principles. The third and last, but I would say the most important thing here is that the relationship and our dating and the way we live our lives should be holy. And you might be wondering, like, holy? Like, what does it have to do with anything? I like to stress this. For the longest time we've lived our lives, we've been bombarded with lies upon lies upon lies by the devil and by the world. And to a certain extent, we have been living those wrong ideas out and living out and responding to the world in the wrong context. When we hear the word holy, we're like, holy? Who wants to be holy? But at the core of it, this is our destiny too. We're called to be holy. Jesus said so himself. We must be holy as our Heavenly Father is holy. About 6 years ago, I was similar to today, snowstorm. I was living in Calgary in 2012. And I remember I was taking the bus to work. It was snowing like really bad outside, but I had to go to work. I was late already. I was listening to a reflection of Pope Benedict XVI. And he said this, like it was said by someone else, but what he said was this. Being a Christian is not a result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but rather an encounter with an event, a person which gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction. He wrote this in the second paragraph of Deus Caritas Est. And I was really early at this point in, like, digging deeper into my faith and digging deeper into my relationship with God. But when I heard that, like, I could not explain why, but I started crying in the bus. Like, legit, like ugly crying. And I was like wiping my like nose and my tears. I'm like, like, because for the first time in my life, I recognize that the person who said this was madly and truly in love. When we think of holiness, we tend to think of this whitewashed statues, right? Of saints who can do no wrong. But that is so much further from the truth. I'd like to share it to you a quote. This is a letter of Saint Gianna Mala. I'm not gonna. For those who don't know, Saint Gianna Mala was alive about like 60 years ago. Fairly modern saint. Anyway, her story was that she was in a loving family. She got pregnant, and the doctor because the pregnancy wasn't that doing well. The doctor wanted her to abort, but she opted not to. Anyway, long story short, baby Gianna was born, and Saint Gianna died. And the church has recognized her holiness and her act of gift of self, that she was raised to the altars of our church. Anyway, what's interesting is that I met her daughter, like in Philly, like 4 years ago. And I wanted to touch my rosary to her because, like, if you think about it, she's a first-class relic. Like, she's literally flesh and blood of a saint. Anyway, she has this, there's a book that was compiled by the Daughters of St. Paul of her letter to her husband and her husband's letter to her. And I'd like you to read an excerpt of it, okay? I'm going to show it, and then I'm going to read it. So read it first, and then let it sink in, and then I'm going to read it. Saint Gianna wrote this to Pietro, her husband. I really want to make you happy and be what you desire. Good, understanding, and ready for the sacrifices that life will require of us. I really want to make you happy and be what you desire. Good, understanding, and ready for the sacrifice that life will require of us. Friends, Saint Gianna Mala understood what her vocation meant. It's interesting because when she wrote this, I think they were still like getting to know one another. But she knew already that he was going to be the husband of her husband and the father to her children. And she freely gave herself to him, rightly, in an intimate way, but in a righteous way, like an ordered way. This woman is a holy woman. She is, in fact, a saint. You can ask for her intercession. But don't tell me that if you read this excerpt alone, that you do not see a woman who is madly and truly in love. Whether we like it or not, to an extent, we in the church have misunderstood what it means to be holy. Because at the core of what we do is in fact romantic. I came across this a few years ago. And I revisited today just because I wanted to share this to you. Okay, I'll read it to you first, and then you guys do the reading after. Catholics are romantic. We believe that two people can fall in love and stay in love. We believe that the biggest jerk can become the holiest person in our lives. We believe that the lowly are the ones who will be raised, the downtrodden will be blessed, and the ones who are taken advantage of, justified. We believe that joy changes lives, that a piece of bread and a cup of wine transforms into the body and blood of Christ. And consuming that body and blood will transform us. We believe that we can step into a confessional, a repentant sinner, and walk out a forgiven son or daughter. Catholics are romantic. We are romantic. This is a quote from Father Ryan Mann of one of the dioceses in Ohio. When I first read that, I was like, he gets it, right? Like, he gets it. Our faith is such, read your Bible. Tell me what you do not see there, or what you should be seeing there. It's an entire love story from beginning to ending. God sent his only son. We were created in love. We were saved in love. What don't we get about this? This is a love story, right? This is a love story. Our faith is a love story. But the first thing we throw away when we fall in love, quote unquote, we put Jesus on the side. We put God on the side. We put faith on the side. Only to fail to recognize that God, who is love, and love, who is God, is the source of all love. And we are just being drawn into it. This is why it's rightly, even though this is a bit disconcerting to some people, Ephesians chapter 5, right? Wives, be subject and respect your husbands. And people are like, ooh, they're up in arms because they read this part. They fail to read the second half of it, where it literally says, husbands, love like Christ and sacrifice your life as Christ did for his church. Those are heavy words. Those words is literally calling the husband to offer his life. Right? So what does it mean then? In the context of these three things, right? We're called, our lens should be that dating should be happy, be healthy, and holy. So how do we do that? Well, here's the practical thing. I read a recent book by Archbishop Chaput that he wrote 3 years ago, but when I read it, I was mind blown because it was so prophetic. But in the end, towards the end, he says this: the most practical thing that we can do to change the world the way you want it, it's not efficiencies, it's not the best ideas, it's not the best program. Youth group won't save you. Young adult group won't save you. Even dating won't save you. Your marriage won't even save you. You know what will save you? He wrote it this way. 3 simple words. Be a saint. Be a saint. Be a saint. We need to cultivate our desire to be holy, to cooperate with God's grace to be holy. Only then can our relationships start to become happier, healthier, and holier. Only then can it slowly change the people closest to us and change the people around us. And we will cultivate a better, happier, healthier, and holier world. I'll leave you with these 3 things. You might not be in your vocation right now. Big V vocation, okay? You might not be married yet. You might not be a priest yet, even though you're called to it. You might not be a religious yet. You might not be consecrated yet. We might not know if that time will come. But there's one thing I realized and just recognized, is that our call to holiness isn't so much about the future than it is now. I'll say that again. It's not so much about the future than it is now. The way we date, we're called to be a saint now in the way we date. We're called to be a saint now in the way we do our university courses. We're called to be a saint now in how we deal with our relationships. We're called to be a saint now in how we relate to our parents, to our siblings, to our classmates, to our co-workers. We're called to be saints now in the way we do our civic duties. How do we do these three things? I suggest, in a practical manner, live out the three evangelical counsels of chastity, poverty, and obedience. 1. Why chastity? Because if ordered properly and ordered and acted upon rightly, the other becomes an object and an objective of our love. It draws us out of ourselves. Chaste love, quoting St. John Paul II, only a chaste man and a chaste woman is capable of true love, right? If we practice chastity, the other becomes the object and objective of our love. 2, poverty. It becomes self-emptying so that the riches and the richness of our experiences is given away, right? Number 3, obedience. If you ask any priest, if you ask any religious, ask anyone who is married, what's the hardest thing to do in life? It's to obey. It's hard to obey with my wife when I disagree with her completely. Like legit, like I want to but at the end of the day, I'm called to obey. Ask any priest who has vows of obedience to his bishop. Ask them, is it hard to not have a wife? No. What's the hardest thing that they have to do in life? To obey their bishop. Ask any religious, what's the hardest thing to do in their life? It's to obey their superior. Obedience is the chief virtue that needs to defeat the original sin of pride. Pride is the cause of all our fall. Our fallen nature. Lucifer fell because of pride. It can only be combated and be achieved if we cultivate the hardest virtue, which Christ himself fully did and obeyed. He obeyed God's will completely. Cultivate the counsels of chastity, poverty, and obedience. You are well on your way. I'll end with this story. I think I've been talking a lot now. My wife's going to kill me. She's like, you talk too much. When I was discerning for, quick backstory, 5 years ago, I fell in love with this idea of a girl. She was a girl from my community. She was a happy, healthy, and holy woman, right? Unfortunately, she lived in a different part of the world. I won't say where because this is recorded online and I'm pretty sure she's going to see this. But anyway, we're good friends now. But I fell in love with the idea of her. Not her. I fell in love with the idea of her. And eventually, of course, she said no and she said yes to her, the guy who eventually became her spouse. It broke my heart. And I was so heartbroken that I decided, you know what, screw girls, I'm going to become a priest, right? And so I was on mission in Bermuda. I was giving a session, a retreat for young adults there. I was there for I think 2 weeks. I remember I was on top of this pink rock. If anyone here who's been to Bermuda, there's a spot there that every tourist goes. You climb up this rock in the middle of the beach, and it feels because you're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And there, I distinctly thought that I'm going to be a priest. I said, you know what? I'm going to be a priest. I don't need no woman in my life, I don't need no one to make me happy. I'm fulfilled. I love God. I love the Lord. I want to serve the Lord for the rest of my life. So I go back to Toronto. I messaged my spiritual director. I said, hey, Father, let's do this. I'm going to become a priest. Let's do it. And then 2 days later, I got appendicitis. And I was rushed to the hospital. I was in severe pain. And I remember recuperating on the hospital bed. I was like, I can't live life alone. I need someone to take care of me. Guys, you know this feeling, right? when you're sick, you need a mom. Like, that's what I realized. And that's what I recognized. I'm like, I'm such a baby. And I was like, you know what? I need a wife. In that moment, God, in that desire, God made me realize that I can't live life alone. I need a helpmate, right? Who can manifest God. And the Catechism actually says this. And it was then that I met my wife. Well, of course, she wasn't my wife then. She was also a member of community. And for those of you who are in community, she was also a leader. But the moment I saw her and met her, like right then and there, I was like, you know what? This is going to be my wife. And I took tangible steps from there on out. I got to know her. I stated my intentions. And then off we went. And then eventually, now we're married. We've been married for the past 2 years. What are you going to get out of this story? My friends, all our stories are different. Your stories will be radically different from mine. I know a lot of people who have known their vocations the moment they were born. Like, they knew they were going to be a priest. They knew they were going to be a wife. The timings will be different for you and me. I'll be turning 33 by the end of this month, like in a few days. It's my Jesus year. I'm quite afraid. Please pray for me, because I feel like I'm going to get crucified this year. Our times will be different. Some of you might be called to marriage now. Some of you are married now. Some of you have been married for quite some time. Some of you might not be married for quite some time or even at all. But what matters is not what is to come, but what you're called to do now, which is to be a saint. My dear friends, our call, therefore, as Christians, is this: to baptize the culture. Remember, at the very beginning, there were good ideas, bad ideas, great ideas, and terrible ideas. Take the good, sanctify it. We are all baptized. We all share in the priestly, prophetic, and kingly office of Christ. Take the good of what you have now and offer and set it apart for God. Only then and only then can we change the way the world works. And hopefully along the way, your vocation and our vocation becomes clearer and clearer. Because ultimately, we're all called to be with God. How we get to God is dependent on God and our own personal journeys towards that.